Let's talk about some things that are a little insensitive to say to someone with a chronic illness and do a little nighttime skincare routine, shall we? Hello, my name is Nina. Welcome back to the 12 Days of Wellnessmas. I'm posting a video on this channel every single day leading up to Christmas surrounding the topic of wellness. Now, I have a chronic illness called Crohn's disease, if you didn't know, and today's wellness related topic is going to be sort of around that. I've said it before and I'll say it again. Once you get a diagnosis, this magical thing happens where everyone around you seems to suddenly have an opinion, have a medical degree, have all sorts of things to say to you. And if you're in that boat, you realize how frustrating that is. So now I feel like I just want to have a little kiki here and do some nighttime skincare and talk about all of these annoying things that tend to be said to you when you have a chronic illness. Of course, I don't want to be shady. I don't want to be mean. I assume that with a video like this, you probably clicked on it because you want to feel seen and validated and heard. So I understand if I might be just preaching to the choir in this video, but I also want to provide some more context around why these things are difficult to hear as someone who is chronically ill, and maybe give some pointers around what to say instead that gets the same intention across, so that if you are in a situation where someone that you love has been diagnosed with a chronic illness, you might understand a little bit more about what they might be going through and what might be helpful for them in a time like this. And maybe if you're someone with a chronic illness, some of these suggestions might be useful in terms of like how to ask people to better support you. So yes, we're gonna have a bit of a kiki, but hopefully this will also be a helpful sort of video. Now, I've already gone ahead and taken off my makeup in the bathroom. I felt like that just wouldn't be pleasant for anyone if I took you in there for that experience. What I used was, first off, this Green Clean Pharmacy cleansing balm. I'm quite a fan of cleansing balms in favor of makeup wipes or cleansing oils. I find it to be a much nicer experience and more effective. And then after using that cleansing balm, I went in with this cleanser that I'm trying out, the Glow Recipe Blueberry Bounce Gentle Cleanser. I really like Glow Recipe. To me, there's not much to a cleanser. Like, there's not much that generally like impresses me about a cleanser, but actually I tried out this other Glow Recipe cleanser. It's like in a green tube, and I enjoyed that very much. It was like very moisturizing and like soft. It made my skin feel soft. This also makes my skin feel good, but I guess like what I prefer in general in a nighttime cleanser is something like more creamy, milky sort of situation. Let's go ahead now and pull these bangs back. It's official. I have never looked cuter on the internet. So actually what I'm going to start with first, after having taken off my makeup, is I'm going to go back in with this pharmacy cleansing balm. This is a technique that I heard a little while ago, where after your skin is cleansed, to go back in with the cleansing balm, because apparently it just pulls out like all of the oils that are deep in there in your pores. It's just like to get the most complete clean as possible, and cleansing balms are like a very pleasant experience as well in terms of having your skin feel soft and smooth. And honestly, I don't have a very involved like nighttime skincare routine, and I want to get through like a handful of points, and so I'm going to be spending the first 20 minutes just rubbing this into my skin to really pull out all of the impurities. And while I'm doing that, the first thing that I want to bring up that I highly recommend you do not say to a chronically ill person is something along the lines of like, you're making things worse, you need to think positively. Being chronically ill is tough. It's not a fun experience at all. There are really deeply difficult moments in it. Of course, also, mindset is really important in a number of things. And when it comes to a lot of chronic illnesses, I know autoimmune illnesses like the one that I have, it's really important to manage stress. And a lot of people like understand that. So sometimes when they see you like feeling really noticeably down, or just like sometimes there are a lot of things going wrong and you want to talk about it, right? And so you might like do a fair bit of complaining from time to time as a chronically ill person. And so people want to remind you to think positive, not to stress yourself out. But this is obviously a really difficult thing to hear for a number of reasons. One thing is that there's like an undertone to this phrase, to this sentiment that sort of says, this is your fault. You're making this worse. You're the reason why you're even in any of this pain or discomfort, or these things are going wrong with you. So there's like a blaming undertone to it. And obviously that doesn't feel good. And it's also just like unfair to say to a person, even if that's not your intention or you're not overtly saying it, that sometimes is what's communicated. Second of all, being told to think positively rarely has the effect of making someone feel better or feel more positive. I think that for some reason, like, not to get all, we live in a society, but I feel like we live in a society where people just tend to be very uncomfortable with emotions. And, you know, that can be coming from a good place. Like, people who love you don't want to see you in pain, but sometimes their discomfort with what you're going through can make it so that they have a hard time like holding space for what you need. When you're going through a lot of intense and painful and difficult things on an everyday basis, as a lot of people who are chronically ill are, at least during certain periods of their illness, you need to have the space, you need to have the opportunity to process that and to let it out. And a lot of times it's really helpful to talk to someone, to feel acknowledged and validated with what you're going through. And when that sort of like gets shut down and you're told in so many words, like stop complaining, that can be really, really, really discouraging for anybody, like in any context, whether you're chronically ill or not. If that happens to you, that's going to be frustrating. So my suggestion, if this is ever your impulse to say to someone when they are going through a hard time with their chronic illness, try to think instead of something that you could say that would make them think more positively. A lot of times that comes from first and foremost acknowledging their pain and telling them that it's valid, because when you don't feel heard, you're just going to scream. You're just going to scream louder and louder. So sort of like the first step to getting someone who is distressed about their chronic illness to a more relaxed and positive place where they're not as stressed out about whatever they're going through with their chronic illness is to just let them know that they're being heard and letting them know that you're there for them. Because one of the most painful things is like feeling like you're not understood when you're dealing with a chronic illness, feeling like no one could ever really understand what you're going through. And it's not like people necessarily can if they don't have that same experience. But if you could be open to listening and help your loved one not feel alone, then that's really helpful. That's probably going to help them think more positively about the situation. The next point to bring up, the next thing that I recommend you do not say to a chronically ill person, is actually quite a large umbrella. And most of the frustrating things that get said to me about my chronic illness fall under this umbrella. And basically, it's any like unsolicited advice, any recommendations for treatment, any like diet recommendations, any unsolicited advice, I would recommend that you refrain from. I would even recommend, like, sometimes people ask, like, can I give you some advice? I would still steer away from that because it puts someone in a really awkward position. I feel like it puts me in a very awkward position when someone asks me, like, can I give you some advice? Can I give you a suggestion? Because I want to say no, but I don't want to be rude. So I would refrain from giving any type of advice or suggestion unless someone is sort of like in the position of asking you, of coming to you, of asking for your input, of wondering if you have any recommendations or suggestions, or if you like happen to be in this person's life and you're also a medical professional who is quite familiar or specializes with the chronic illness that they're dealing with, then maybe you're allowed to give unsolicited advice. Maybe. Now, the reason why I think that people like have a huge impulse when they hear that someone is suffering, when someone is going through something, to offer advice is, again, from that same place of like, people tend to feel uncomfortable with people being in pain. And the way that I feel like we've learned to deal with that first and foremost is by trying to fix the problem again, instead of like holding space. But the reason why this can be so frustrating to hear as a chronically ill person is, first of all, we're probably hearing it like all the time. Like, everybody has an opinion of how we should treat our chronic illness. But at the same time, nobody knows our situation more intimately than we do, and the doctors that we're working with, or whatever care team we decide to work with. And so it is a little insulting when people try to jump in and give advice or give suggestions, because the implication there is like, oh, you don't know what you're doing. I know better than you about this problem. And I know that that's like more than likely never the intention, but that is sometimes what can come across. As chronically ill people, we spend so much time trying to understand and research what is going on with us and what we can do to help ourselves and help our situation, that it's like, first of all, more frustrating to be inundated with more input, more suggestions, and second of all, to sort of feel that implication in that offering of advice that we don't know what's best for us. And last thing that I'll say about this point is that oftentimes the advice that people give doesn't come from a well-informed place, to be completely honest. People are likely to give advice from a place of personal experience, what they've been through, what's worked for them. And on the whole, people who are chronically ill are not giving advice and suggestions and treatment recommendations to other people who are chronically ill, because we go through this so much and it is so frustrating that we're not likely to put someone else in the same position that we find ourselves in constantly, that we're so frustrated with. So more than likely, someone who is giving advice to you as a chronically ill person does not have the same chronic illness as you, probably doesn't have any chronic illness, and therefore may not be giving a recommendation from a very informed place. I've had people like say, oh, this helped me with X, Y, and Z that's like totally unrelated to Crohn's. You should try it. It will help you. And I understand that the intention there is kind, the intention there is good, but it's another one of those things that can end up making us feel misunderstood. And also, some of these things that people suggest are so trivial that it really minimizes the seriousness of the chronic illness that we're facing. Like, oh, you have Crohn's? Drink some hot tea. That should help. You know, one time I had diarrhea and I just took some Imodium and that was all better. You can understand how that can be trivializing. So if you really want to help the person that you care about with a chronic illness, and your first sort of impulse is to give a suggestion, give a recommendation, give some unsolicited medical advice, it's worth just like asking the person, hey, how can I be here to help you? What's something that I can do to help a little bit? I guarantee you it's not going to be like, hey, can you research some medical treatment options for me and let me know what you find? Likely it's going to be something like, hey, instead of eating out, can we maybe have a chill night in? Would you be willing to like help me clean up and maybe pull a little more weight than I do because my chronic illness is really taking it out of me? Can I vent to you? Can I have a moment to complain for a second? It's not about fixing the issue. It's just, again, about holding space for where that person is at. And this sort of topic is a large umbrella. Just refrain from all unsolicited medical advice, but it sort of bleeds into the next thing that I would recommend that you refrain from saying to a chronically ill person. And basically, it's not like a thing that you shouldn't say, but I would recommend that if you have an experience that to you is sort of reminiscent of what you feel like this person with a chronic illness that you care about is going through, I would refrain from comparing the two, like talking about your experience if it is not the same. Because again, you can get into a tricky issue of trivializing the matter. And also, it's another way of like not holding space for the person. Of course, like I keep like bringing up the point of make space for the person. It's not like you can't talk about something that's relevant to you and you just always have to like walk around eggshells around a chronically ill person and whatever. Like you can still be a normal person around us. We can still have two-way conversations. But if you think that when someone with a chronic illness is talking about some difficulty that they're having with their chronic illness, it might be helpful to them for you to like relate and be like, oh yeah, I've totally been constipated before. Or like, oh yeah, once I got super lightheaded and I thought that I was gonna faint in the middle of a Target. It's probably not having that effect. Because you have to think about as well, you might very much have an experience that's very similar to a symptom that this person with a chronic illness experiences, but they are dealing with something that is lifelong, that they battle every single day and will for the rest of their lives. So it's something that, unless you're in the exact same boat, you just can't compare to. If you want to be there and let them know, like, you understand that this sucks, like, you don't have to come up with an example of like an instance where you felt something similar so you know that it sucks. You can just say that it sucks and not have to like prove that you know that it sucks. Because when you say that you know that it sucks because you went through something that was similarly sucky, it's actually not even close to the amount of suckiness that they're going through. I can guarantee you. Okay, I think that I've had enough of rubbing this all over my face. So I'm gonna go ahead and wash this off my face and come back for my next point and my next product. So what I have here is a very, very mild retinol that I got from my dermatologist. It's like only 0.1% tretinoin cream. Retinol is the like holy grail, everything anti-aging product, but it's not just anti-aging, it's also good for acne and basically like anything that is unpleasant about your skin, because it encourages like skin turnover. And so like if you want to make sure that your skin is looking youthful, fast skin turnover, if you want to get rid of any annoying spots or chronic acne, quick skin turnover is your friend, but it's also a pretty strong product. So I'm only going to use like a pea-sized amount for my whole face. Whoop. Okay, that is a whole lot more than a pea-sized amount, but we're gonna make it work. We're gonna put it on the neck. So the next thing, I really recommend that you don't say to a chronically ill person, you don't say to any person at all, really. Please, can we just cancel? Can we just all agree to never comment on what somebody is eating? This is something obviously that's like very relevant to me and my chronic illness because it has to do with digestion. And so a lot of people are mindful that like food can make it worse, even though in my case, actually, I will have symptoms regardless of what food that I eat. But in general, a lot of chronic illnesses, a lot of like illnesses in general, there's this idea that you can really help out your situation by following a certain type of diet, and that certain foods are just like not healthy for you in general, so you should avoid eating them anyway. And so this sometimes gives people the license, they feel like, to point out what someone is eating when they have a chronic illness that they don't think is very healthy or whatever, and judge it blatantly to their face and make the suggestion like, you shouldn't eat that. Stop eating that. Why are you eating that? I feel like that is just like rude and inappropriate. And the reason why it's especially frustrating to someone who is chronically ill is that, especially with someone with IBD like me, there is already so much anxiety and stress around what we're eating, if it's going to be something that causes a larger flare than maybe we're already in, if it's something that's going to keep us up at night in pain, or that's going to cause us to throw up afterwards. And so there is a lot of intention when it comes to the food that we do decide to eat. We really weigh our options. Sometimes we're going to take a risk because we feel like it's worth it, but it's definitely not something that anyone with IBD and likely with any chronic illness does cavalierly. Like, what we eat is super intentional and thought out, and we're probably overthinking it. So to go through all of that stress and whatnot on our own to like make a decision about whether we're going to eat something or not, or what we're going to eat, and then to be like in the process of eating that, to have someone comment on that and essentially like wag their finger at you is really hurtful. Again, I don't feel like anybody appreciates it when you comment on what they're eating. Food already for a lot of people is a really sensitive subject. So if you see someone who is chronically ill and you see them eating a food that you've read online, or you have a particular intuition or a particular opinion that that food is not good for them, it's actually none of your business. If you're genuinely concerned, I can pretty much all but assure you that that person is doing their best and they're just trying to get by and do something that is probably a lot harder for them than it is for most people. Trust them on their journey. If they don't know what's best for them now, they'll figure it out. Give them the space to do that. Understand that they have so many resources at their disposal, and likely a handful of professionals at their disposal to make the best decisions for them and their health, including what they're going to eat. And maybe they know already that this is something that they shouldn't eat, but maybe they're at a point where they feel like it's worth it for whatever reason. They want to treat themselves with something that maybe is like not healthy, not good. Just let them be. Another thing that I feel like is absolutely unhinged, I'm going in with Ultra Repair Moisturizer from First Aid Beauty, unhinged to say to anyone, but to someone chronically ill, this is something that I feel like is very, very Crohn's specific, very IBD specific, but it very well could be relevant to other chronic illnesses. With Crohn's, it is very common because of the nature of the illness to lose a lot of weight in an unhealthy amount of time for unhealthy reasons, because you can't eat, or even if you are eating, you're not absorbing nutrition properly. Stuff is just going right through you or coming back out you. It's definitely one of the most, if not the most, notable symptoms that you can see manifest on a person on the outside with Crohn's. And sometimes I'll be talking to someone and, they're giving me space to talk about my illness, and I'll mention like, yeah, I went through something super concerning last week. I'm not going to bring up specific numbers because I don't want to like trigger anybody, but I'll say I lost X amount of weight in X amount of time, and it's too much weight for that amount of time, unequivocally. And it is super disappointing how many times I have been in that situation and I have heard this response. Wow, I wish I could lose weight that fast. Sometimes it's a joke, haha. Sometimes I wonder if maybe it's not, but that is something super, super insensitive to say to someone who is chronically ill, or even just like in any situation, loses a large amount of weight in a short amount of time because of some unhealthy or unfortunate situation. Let me just tell you, no, you don't. No, you don't wish that you could lose weight that quickly. It takes drastic, awful, unpleasant measures to do so, and it leaves you feeling awful. If I'm losing a large amount of weight very quickly, it's because I'm literally not absorbing nutrients. It's because I literally can't keep my food down. It's literally because I'm at the worst points that I can be at with my disease. The exhaustion, the fight, the effort to get through the day without just like nutrition, because there's so many things against you. The pain of what it takes. It's also not something that we want. We don't want to be losing that weight. We would really rather not. So to laugh it off with something like that, read the room. Read the room. Not the appropriate time, not the appropriate thing to say. I feel like it's the first thing that pops into people's minds when you say like, oh, I lost so and such amount of weight in such and such amount of time. It's like, I feel like that pops into people's head like, oh, I wish I could lose weight that quickly. But don't say just the first thing that pops into your mind if that's it. If you don't know what to say because you feel like it's an awkward thing and you don't know how to react to that, just say like, damn, that sucks. It sounds like you're not doing well. That's sometimes all we really want. We just want you to acknowledge that what we're going through is real and that you understand at least on some level. Now I'm going to moisturize my lips with the Lano Lips 101 Ointment Multi-Purpose Super Balm. Now here's something that I don't know if everyone is going to agree with me on, or if it's something kind of like just a me thing. But tell me what you think about the phrase, how are you doing? It's kind of a loaded one. And when you're chronically ill and you get that very specific, how are you doing? Or you get one of those like, hey, how are you doing really? It's an awkward one to respond to. I think specifically when it comes to context, right? So if we're sitting down, it's a one-on-one conversation specifically. We're gonna spend some time like chatting, catching up. You're gonna tell me about your life and I'm gonna tell you about mine. Or it's like the end of the day and it's like, hey, how are you doing? I'm checking in and we're like close. Then how are you doing sort of like makes sense. And especially if you communicate that like you're really willing to hear the long and short of it. But there are a lot of like, how you doings that I feel like just don't come up at the right time. Because really when it comes down to it, when you're chronically ill and someone asks you a genuine, how are you doing? there is no like short answer. It's not just like, I'm good or I'm bad. Like there's a lot behind that question. There's a lot to that answer, very likely. So when you're phrasing the question, how are you doing, to someone chronically ill, with that undertone of like, how are you doing with your illness? Just be cognizant of asking it in an environment where you feel like that person has the opportunity to tell you. Make sure you don't ask that question if you don't want to hear the answer, if you're not willing to hear a longer answer. Because also sometimes like the agenda of whatever situation we're in is not conducive to like tell you how I'm doing, right? Like we're just like greeting each other at a party and I have like 10 other people to greet. Now is not the time for you to ask like, how are you doing? It's like, I've got things in my hand. I got a chocolate mousse in my arms. I got to drop this off at the kitchen. I feel really awkward just in the middle of this bustling situation to like sit down and like unload something that is actually quite like burdensome. It's actually something quite stressful to bring up and to talk about. If my mindset is somewhere else, if there's something else that I have to do, something else that I am focusing on, if I'm not coming to this like particular situation, whatever it is, to like have a heart to heart with you where I feel comfortable like opening up about a pretty deep thing in my life, I don't like the question, how are you doing? I don't like being prompted in that way. And I think some of it is just like a complex that I have where I don't like to be dishonest with that question. Like even before I was chronically ill and people would ask me, how are you doing? I'd be like, okay, I know that just like the right answer is to say like, good, I'm doing good, independently of what's going on. It's okay, just say you're doing good. But that always like, I always struggled with that because I'm just like, why does everybody ask the question and nobody wants the answer? But then the how are you doing that you get when you're chronically ill, it's a whole different how are you doing. It's like, consider it this way, maybe. Someone is going through a difficult thing in life, right? Maybe their grandma died. Maybe they just went through a breakup. Consider what scenarios you're going to ask them how that's going for them. And just understand that the question, how are you doing, to someone who is chronically ill might carry the same weight as if you ask someone who's going through a breakup how they're doing with the breakup, or you're asking someone who's just gone through a traumatic loss how they're doing with that loss. You don't want to say something just to seem considerate if you're not ready to hold space for that person. And you don't want to ask something in a situation that's inappropriate. You don't want to catch someone off guard about a topic that's really sensitive to them when they're kind of like in a different headspace doing something else. Let me know if you're chronically ill, how you feel about the question, how are you? And if I'm maybe just being a little too sensitive. And the last one here that I would recommend that you don't say to a chronically ill person, specifically, this is something that comes up when someone is just like recently diagnosed, and that is, shouldn't you get a second opinion? To understand why that's difficult to hear, you must know that it can be a very, very difficult process to get diagnosed. That period of time when you're suffering with a chronic illness and you're not diagnosed is such a mind fuck, because your mind is like playing all these tricks on you, telling you like you're faking it, what you're going through isn't really real, just push through it, come on, you can do it, stop being such a baby, whatever. Sometimes that's coming from outside voices, but also a lot of times that's our brain saying some stuff when we're dealing with this really like terrible looming thing. We have no idea what it is. For Crohn's disease, luckily, it's a very black or white thing if it is Crohn's disease or if it's not. Once you get a look inside, it is very visually apparent whether something is Crohn's disease or whether it's something else. But for other people who have different chronic illnesses, sometimes it's not like that. Sometimes it's not something that's able to be fully visualized, and it's just diagnosed based on the symptoms. And in that case, sometimes there is room for wavering opinion, and sometimes that person will go to the doctor or several doctors over and over again trying to get answers, and they get downplayed and they don't get diagnosed, and they get told outright, like, maybe it's just anxiety, maybe you're just too sensitive. And that's so frustrating to hear over and over again. So for a person like that, especially, once they finally get a diagnosis, it is such a big deal. It's such a relief. It's such a validating thing. And it's something that truly impacts their identity and really helps them understand themselves. And I understand where people are coming from when they ask this question, don't you want a second opinion? It usually comes from a place of wow, you just told them that you were diagnosed with something pretty serious. It's lifelong. They probably don't want to accept that themselves. If they care about you, they don't want to have to confront the fact that the person that they love has a lifelong serious chronic issue. So their hope is that it's something less serious. They don't understand the seriousness of what you're feeling on the inside. So they can hope, they can imagine that maybe it's not that bad because that's what they want for you. But it is just a gut punch to hear from someone who's newly diagnosed, because all of those voices come back, all of those doubts, all of those mean thoughts of you're being a baby, this is all in your head, you're being so dramatic, stop being such a whiny bitch, whatever it is that your stupid gremlin kept saying in your voice when you were suffering so hard and you didn't understand why. All of those things come back in a wave and just hit you like a truck all at once. And you're bound to get frustrated. You're bound to double down and be like, no, seriously, I've been through all of this. The person said it was X, Y, and Z. This is the best specialist in their practice. I was on a wait list to see this person for 6 months and blah, 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 blah. It is such a frustrating process for a lot of people to finally get diagnosed. And it's such a mental battle to get to that point that I hope that my explanation can help someone understand that while I understand where you're probably coming from asking this question, it is probably not a good idea to suggest to someone newly diagnosed that they get a second opinion. If they're happy with the diagnosis, if it's something that sticks with them, that resonates with them, that explains to them in a satisfying way what it is that they're going through, that is such a win. That is such a win for them. And I know that it's hard to think about your loved one having to deal with this for the rest of their lives, but you'll get through it. They'll get through it, especially, hopefully, after listening to some of the stuff that I have to say on the subject about basically how you can be there for someone who is chronically ill. I hope that this was a useful, helpful video to you. I would love to know what you got out of it in the comments down below. Thank you so much for watching. If you like this style of video where I talked about chronic illness and got ready/unready, then maybe you'll like this video that I put out a little while ago where I did my morning skincare and makeup and talked about my Crohn's disease. But that's all that I have for you for today. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll talk to you tomorrow for the next day of Wellnessmas. Bye.